If you're a fan of historical dramas and want to watch a show that falls somewhere between the bitchiness of the Gilded Age and the sexiness of Outlander, at least in its earlier seasons, Mary and George would be your cup of tea. In fact, Mary and George even used some of the same locations as Outlander, but it's a great show in its own right. I have been waiting for this for some time and it's finally out on Starz. In this video, I'm gonna do a breakdown of episode 1 titled The Second Son and then discuss whether the events portrayed there are loyal to historical accounts about the real Mary and George. Let's start, shall we? Episode 1 Breakdown and Analysis. The episode starts with Mary giving birth to George. There couldn't have been a better start. This scene summarizes George's role in Mary's life. Right after he's born, he falls to the ground and hits his head. No one really cares because he's the second son. He already has an older brother, John, who will inherit the family name and fortune, so George is basically useless. He's the spare, aka Prince Harry. But from the moment he's born, Mary's relationship with him is different. The codependency starts right there when we see Mary not wanting to cut the umbilical cord. She wants him to be a part of her a little longer.
Leave him attached for now.
20 years later, George is literally fucked up. He plans fake suicides to get his mother's attention, the mother who has big plans for him. The older son, John, is probably autistic and is not exactly the son Mary's husband was rooting for.
A hollow boy, all I built dies with your John.
So Mary's hope is in George. She wants him to get an education to become a gentleman in France. George doesn't want to go. At first glance, you get the impression that this boy likes Jenny, the maid, as well as all the boys he cannot keep his eyes off of, and doesn't want to let go of his life here. But upon second glance, you realize that he doesn't want to be away from his mother. George needs Mary as much as she needs him. It's codependency to its core. George makes excuses about how his father doesn't want him to go to France either, and what happens? The father's dead in the next scene. We didn't really need a flashback to know that it was Mary's job, but the abuse scene was probably included to humanize Mary a little bit. She's not entirely an evil bitch who wants to increase her power through her son and then goes around killing people. She has been abused by her husband for years, so the viewer understands her motivations. When her husband dies, Mary knows she should find a new husband immediately, and she does. Her only wish is to send George to France for the education, and the husband agrees. They even sign a prenup, but it's prepared by the not-so-honest-looking bookkeeper who told her she should wait at least a few weeks to get married. I have a feeling that document was not what the husband thought it would be, but we'll see. When George goes to France, he learns how to fight, dance, and speak French, but he also gets sex education. And yes, the show does not shy away from showing us penises, lots of penises. One thing I liked about the visual representation of the show was the scenes with George walking around at night with a candle and Mary doing the same in her own home. When the king stays in Mary's home for a few days, Mary is curious about him and wants to catch what he's doing with Robert, the king's current favorite. George also does the same thing. He spies around the house hoping to catch Jean with another man. But unlike his mother, who works in the shadows, who observes and plots in the dark, as the scene with Sir David Graham showed too, George will use his body and looks to win over the king. Speaking of David, he confides in Mary that he hates the fact that a Scotsman, Robert, is manipulating the king. It turns out he would rather have an Englishman doing the same, and here the big window opens for Mary and she becomes allies with David to achieve that. George returns from France. At first glance, he seems like a changed man. He's more charismatic and more confident, but it's all a facade. He's back to his old self as soon as he fails the first mission to impress the king. Do you think the second cupbearer who tripped George up was also arranged by Mary? Because that scene made sure the king would see George even in that embarrassing situation. I have a feeling she had a role in that, but I'm not sure. I think George threatening to cut his wrists was only to get his mother's attention. He left the drawer open because he wanted his mother to see it. He didn't do anything to himself until his mother was there because he knew she would come. I guess he does it to get Mary's love and affirmation. He doesn't want to rise in society. He just wants to make his mother happy and satisfied. He didn't want to kill himself because he fell, but because he failed his mother. I have a feeling he will do anything to satisfy Mary. He exists for her. That's the impression I got. What do you think about his motivations? Historical accuracy. Although they are not as of episode 1, Mary and George are indeed significant figures in history. They have a remarkable story and have books written about them. The series is based on a book whose name is a huge spoiler, so I'm not going to say it in case you don't know the entire story. In 1603, when James VI ascended to the English throne, a flood of Scottish courtiers arrived at his court, and this raised concern among the English noblemen about their lack of influence in the court, so David Graham's comment about the king getting influenced by a Scottish man was right on point. Mary sensed an opportunity here and introduced her son to the English court. In the show, Mary's husband says that she was just a maid and that he paid the Beaumont family to make it seem like she was one of them, but Mary burned the document that proved it. This makes an interesting drama, but there's no proof of this in real life as far as I know. Maybe Mary really did burn the document, who knows? One thing's for sure, she was intensely ambitious and did single out George among her 4 children as she thought he had the charms necessary to succeed. When her husband died, she made 2 more marriages to cover her family's debt and ascend the social hierarchy. She then used George to capture the king's attention, and it worked. We'll see how in the following weeks. If you want a video about the real story behind Mary and George, I'll gladly do it. I have a special interest in this period and it would be a joy for me. Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you soon.